All right, everybody. So I've got Vic Medina, Funky Cole Medina is what we call him, Funky Cole, joining. And what's funny, Vic sounds a lot like Super Mexican, who's on the program quite a bit. And Vic happens to be Hispanic and I think of Mexican descent. So the irony is there, but no, we actually have two Mexicans here, and they happen to be conservative. We may have the only two Mexicans who are conservative.
That's what I've been told. I've been told when they find out that I'm Hispanic and I'm a Republican and conservative, people think I'm a mutant, so I'm kind of like a political X-Man or something.
Right, hey,
so,
so am I. Anyway, Victor runs Political Illusions Exposed. We call it PIE. And politicalillusionsexposed.com is where you can find his work. And it was a site set up for millennials, but because the idea behind it was we wanted to poke fun at the politics of the left and put it into millennial speak. So Vic's got a monumental Herculean job in front of him, but he's phenomenal at it. And he's an amazing consultant, got a lot of other talents, and we'll expose you to him along the way. But Vic, I want to talk about what's happening in Paris, because you had an interesting take on something with Al Gore that I'd like the audience to hear about. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and I appreciate it. But yeah, just to get to with all the attention given to the Paris attacks, most people weren't even aware that former Vice President Al Gore was in Paris Friday at the same time, because he was holding a benefit concert on climate change. And well, now to back up and set all this up, Al has already been having a bad week when it comes to climate change. We had the big news that despite he predicted about a decade ago that the polar ice caps were going to disappear and all that, we found out here. Right, they're bigger and icier than ever.
They're bigger and whiter than ever, Al.
Right, and so he needed to change the narrative of climate change. And so he puts together this 24-hour climate change awareness concert, and it's called 24 Hours of Reality. And it's a name that would prove to be ironic given what would happen later on that evening. And so he lines up Pharrell, Elton John, Bon Jovi, and there's just a ton of these artists. And they start the concert Friday night at the Eiffel Tower. And it's streaming online, and then the attacks happen. Right as the concert's starting. So a few hours in, he has to cancel the whole thing. And since it's a benefit concert that people were expected to donate to Al's foundation during this 24-hour event, having to cancel right at the beginning, it's likely it cost them a fortune. And the real irony of this whole thing is that we've been told over and over and over that Al Gore, John Kerry, President Obama, they keep telling us that climate change is the greatest threat to mankind.
The irony of what happens right after that.
Exactly.
I hate to say it, but
it was proven wrong so quickly as this tragedy unfolded. The 24 hours of reality about climate change all of a sudden takes a back seat to the
24 hours reality of terrorists and carnage.
Yeah, our greatest threat is radical Islam,
right.
And that's not exactly a radical idea. And so the narrative of the left that all of our problems could be solved by solving climate change was totally destroyed by, a couple of these terrorists. And so I can't get over the irony that the name 24 Hours of Reality, suddenly we've had 24 hours of reality of radical Islam instead.
It sounds like so we need to have that. You remember that show 24 where it was like frantic, right?
Exactly.
With Kiefer Sutherland. It sounds like they need to do a spinoff of that 24 Hours of Reality.
And in 24, there was always like the one guy who just didn't get it, who just had this politically correct idea of how things were done. And then something happens, that something blows up, and that guy ends up getting killed. And so it's like a slap in the face to all those politically correct people. It's just amazing that, and it's kind of scary that when you really think about it, that, Al has spent since 2000 that he didn't get elected. He's been so laser focused on climate change, and you've never really heard him talk about terrorism. It makes you really wonder, can you imagine if he had been elected in 2000 and then having to face 9/11 and all that, how he would have handled it? It's just amazing to me.
Vic, we don't have to imagine it. We have the very same dude who believes, like Al Gore, that the biggest threat to the world, not just to America, the biggest threat to the world is weather. And for the record, they are technically correct, but it's God's doing. You know what I'm saying? If a meteor is going to hit Earth, there ain't nothing you're going to do about it, Barack Obama.
Exactly. And that's what's so amazing is that they constantly act like we're the anti-science folks. And nobody's arguing the fact that pollution is a problem. The problem that we've run into is you have Barack Obama and Al Gore and all these folks that think a carbon tax or punishing the coal industry is going to make a difference. That really doesn't matter when you've got radical Islam making a huge, turning the world into chaos. But then you find out that the Earth is kind of self-healing. They can rebuild their ice caps. The Earth can find a way through, even through all this pollution and all that. And so nobody's arguing the science.
Quick story.
We're just arguing their response.
Yeah, well, let me say this. I was driving from Fort Worth back to Dallas one time when I lived there, and I was a sales guy, and I was coming back, and it had rained in the interim, and Dallas has this little nasty layer, but it's not like L.A. or some of the places in China where I lived, where it's just unbelievable. People can't even understand pollution because L.A. looks like it's clean compared to some of these cities in China. But in any case, I was coming back, and I'm not kidding you. It was postcard crystal clear in Dallas, Texas, because of the rain. The rain took that inversion layer and just knocked it down to the ground. So, as you say, nature cleans itself up eventually. Now, L.A. is in a bowl, and I get it, and there are places in Mexico that are crazy, and I've been all around the world, and I've seen some horrible pollution. But we're not the ones. America's not the people causing it, number one, and it's always centered around heavily urban, industrialized areas, because you go 1 mile outside of a city and the air is clean.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, I live here in Dallas, so I know exactly what you're talking about. You've got, and it's like we were saying, the Earth is incredibly capable of taking care of itself, even with all of the major, most of the major pollution events that the Earth has had to deal with have been natural.
Exactly.
Whether it's volcanoes or forest fires or that sort of thing.
Or here's another one for you, Vic, for the people that want to talk about fossil fuels. The Earth oozes more oil into the ocean than all of the the ships that have been like those Exxon Valdez and all that they panic about all the time. The Earth oozes more oil out of its surface on the bottom of the ocean I forget the period, but they say it's like a month than we've had in all of the oil spills throughout man. So when these guys talk about, oh my God, it's going to ruin the ecosystem of what? Now, I'm not saying, you're an advocate for let's break ships apart and spill the oil, but at the end of the day, let's put it in perspective.
That's right.
Right,
and that's what's kind of scary, that you've got these leaders that are that have pushed this agenda and are willing to punish, our own people, and they don't hold India, they don't hold China to account, and that sort of thing. And that kind of narrative looks foolish when terrorists pop up and really show you this is what you really have to be afraid of.
One of the other things that I don't know if you want to comment on this, but none of the Islamic countries took a single terrorist. I don't know if you're aware of that. A terrorist took a single refugee. I begin to think of
refugee, right, exactly, and so it's really amazing that it seems we are carrying both the burden of having to do something about the environment, even though we don't contribute nearly as much as other countries, and when we're expected to carry the burden of making the world a better place and helping these people, and no one else seems to be picking up the slack. But we're still being hammered by our own president about how we're still not good enough. We're still not doing enough. We're the ones that have caused the problem. And that's why, events like Paris kind of put everything into perspective, where you even have the media, these guys that have been President Obama's enablers, whether it's on the environment, on terrorism, or anything, are finally asking them, do you get the threat of ISIS? Do you get the kind of world we live in and what what's going on here? And he gets defensive. I mean, you've got an egomaniac who doesn't like being questioned.
That's what everybody's been saying for years, is this guy's he's out of control. Vic, I got to cut it there, buddy. Victor
Sure, no
Medina,
problem.
Political Illusions Exposed, executive director, doing a great job over there, schooling millennials and also schooling some of the conservatives that don't get it as well. Vic, thanks for being on the program.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. We'll talk to you later on.